Before we start, we're going to have 1 minute of silence. Can we please stand? 1 minute of silence. The member, Zikwe, and then Sylvester William, and the unsung heroes in Africa and across the globe, and who all died, in the name of freedom, justice, and the unity of Africanist diaspora. Thank you very much. We have some friends from the Zambia Socialist Party who wrote a statement that I need also a lady to read, but because I'm overwhelmed by different things to do. So Captain Sankara, 30 years later, we will remember you. And then what was assassinated was your body, and not your soul, and not your spirit, not your ideas. In your death, 1 million seeds were planted, and now they are sprouting everywhere. If today we look around Africa and we cannot find a leader who has dared what you dare to do for Burkina Faso and Africa, it's not so much for what you said, but what you actually did in the midst of an opportunity to enrich yourself, and you decided to commit yourself to the peasant and the masses and of the working class. This act, our comrade not only changed and gave dignity to the people of Burkina Faso, but hope, to the toiling masses in Africa. We now have hope that if we continue to struggle and fight, surely soon, and very soon, we will strive and we will have victories. You embrace the issues of women and change lives of many. You were the voice of the voiceless, the hope of the hopeless. You are a comrade that believed in action and not in empty words. Today, our comrade, we commit to continue your legacy and your struggle. I leave you, my comrades, with this phrase from Thomas Sankara for you to reflect upon. We have to work at decolonizing our mentality and achieving happiness within the limits of sacrifice we should be willing to make. We have to recondition our minds and our people to accept themselves as they are, to not be ashamed of the reality and then the real situation, to be satisfied with it, to glory in it. And even 1985, it was a statement, a solidarity statement from Womba Nkanza, International Desk of the Socialist Party of the Zambia. Now, I'm going to call on Ben. Ben is going to give a solidarity statement on behalf of the Black Alliance for Peace, which was an endorser of this conference. Thanks, Ben.
Well as the Black Alliance for Peace. I'm going to read a short statement as to why, kind of connecting the mission of Black Alliance for Peace as well as Thomas Sankara's tradition and how he informs us. So the Black Alliance for Peace was recently started, and we seek to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and peace positions of the radical black movement. We have several principles of unity, such as self-determination, decolonization, independence, and Thomas Sankara fits in this perfectly because if you look at his life and the positions he took, he was clearly anti-imperialist. For example, at the non-aligned movement in 1983, the non-aligned movement being that different countries from what we today call the Global South not wanting to take a side during East or West during the Cold War period, he in New Delhi in 1983 aligned himself with the radical wing of the anti-imperialist movement, people like Samora Machel, Maurice Bishop of Grenada, Fidel Castro of Cuba, and others. Today, we support and defend Venezuela, that's under supreme attack by U.S. imperialism. Places like DPRK in Cuba. DPRK, we know, actually stood by much of Africa during the liberation period, gave arms and weapons, even soldiers, to parts of southern Africa like Angola and Zimbabwe and others, and even supported Egypt during its liberation struggle. We also, as an organization similar to Sankara, who supported the Palestinian liberation struggle, and we are anti-Zionist. We against the settler colonial state of Israel, as it receives billions of dollars every year from the United States in aid. We also know that the Israeli Defense Force actually trains many of the United States police forces in the United States. The Israeli, as it trains many of U.S. police forces, including right here in the Metropolitan Police Department as well. So you see the connections across with different, particularly with Zionism and the connections between empire and anti-colonialism. Sankara is someone who stood against all these things, as well as someone who in 1983, when making a trip to the United Nations, actually spoke at the Harriet Tubman School in 1983. And he said that our White House is in Black Harlem, making the connection because he was always someone who was influenced by the Black liberation movement in the United States, particularly the radical wing, and Harlem is something that's viewed as the sort of national, international capital of Black people around the world. So I wanted to be clear that we stand in solidarity with people of Syria and DPRK as they suffer from U.S. imperialism attempts to undermine liberation movements around the world. And so that's the statement. Thank you, Naka, for the opportunity.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ben. Okay, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to show a video. Omari Musa, who represents the Socialist Workers' Party, and we're going to see an 8-minute video. You want to introduce the video, Omari, and then so that we can see it. As we know, Thomas Sankara was heavily influenced, by the Cuban Revolution, and then we've been connecting, this struggle, everything we've been doing, and the topic of this conference is about transcontinental cooperation from South Africa to Colombia. Then everything that is related to, and Ben just said it, about Palestine, Cuba, Venezuela, everywhere people are oppressed. We've been talking about that, and Omari Musa is going to show a segment, and then of course introduce the Cuban who was at the conference in Namibia. Omari Musa, 5 minutes. No more than, no more than 5.
Good afternoon. My name is Omari Musa, as Kanaka said. I'm a member of the Socialist Workers' Party. I live right here in Washington, D.C. I think I've been to all 6 of the conferences before and engaged with everyone who was here and there in discussion. The video that we have is a speech, very short speech, by Fernando Gonzalez, who is president of the Cuba Institute for Friendship with the Peoples. ICAP are its initials. He was in the United States jails for 15 years, accused by the United States government of being a Cuban spy. He went back home and he became, along with his other 4 comrades, a hero of the revolution. That's what the Cubans think of him. Today, not only are we celebrating the life and legacy of Tomás Sankara, it's the 30th anniversary of his assassination and the overthrow of the popular revolutionary government he led. This week, we also celebrate something else. That is the 50th anniversary of the death in combat of Ernesto Che Guevara. Those 2 things go together. Both were revolutionary Marxists, communists, who dedicated their energies to the advancement of workers and peasants around the world. Both had a world perspective on the struggle of the oppressed and exploited. Both sought to organize what has been called the wretched of the earth, to rise up against imperialism and take power into their own hands and cast aside the local lackeys that support imperialism, as Thomas Sankara showed. I have a very interesting book. I urge all of you to get a copy of it. The name of the book is We Are the Heirs of the World's Revolutions, going back over 150 years that Thomas Sankara absorbed. He fought to lead workers and farmers everywhere and made big strides. I'm not going to go through all of the accomplishments of the Burkinabe Revolution, but what I wanted to do is point out in this introduction that the Cuban Revolution that Guevara helped to lead continues to lead the toilers today. If there is an example you look for in their urge to fight for your liberation and the liberation of world humanity. It is Cuba today. It is one outstanding example of what a revolution is, as was Thomas Sankara. The video that we're about to show shows that this fighting solidarity between Cuba and the peoples of Africa is grown even stronger than the days when Sankara was alive. Sankara would salute all of the people of Cuba for standing strong in their fight and vice versa. The fight in Africa that Cubans contributed to, including the independence of Namibia, the solidarity of Angola, and the beginning of the downfall of apartheid in South Africa, that solidarity is the solidarity that is expressed in this video. The video comes from a conference, the 5th Conference, International African Conference, in solidarity with Cuba, as you could see. It was hosted by the president of the country, and as you'll see in the beginning, there's a beautiful portrait that the Namibian people gave Fernando for his contribution to the struggle. So without any further ado, all we can say is the spirit of the Cuban Revolution and solidarity with Africa continues and deepens today. Thank you very much.
And you also have the revolutionary icon. And so I want to talk a little bit about that sort of dynamic today. So Amar Musa was saying here about the 50th anniversary of Che's death, his execution, October 9th I think it was 1967, and 50 years ago this past week, which is a big deal. And I don't know if you remember, but then Sankara gave a speech, a kind of homage to Che 20 years later. So 30 years ago, roughly this past week, Sankara gave a speech in homage, sort of in commemoration to Che in Ouagadougou. His son, Che's son, Camilo, was there. I don't know if you've probably read the speech in Thomas Sankara Speaks, right? In any case, in that speech, he talked about, Che might be dead, but his ideas live on. You cannot kill ideas, that sort of thing, right? And also he spoke about, the youth thirsting for vitality, for resistance, for new ideas, and how Sankara came to represent what was going on, and how Che came to. They both, in certain ways, when I look at that speech now, I almost see it as a self-eulogy. As we know, Sankara would be assassinated just a week later, but when you read that speech, it's hard not to think that these words could have been said about Sankara himself, right? And certainly, the youth of that period were thirsting for change. Paul Sankara, a couple of years ago when we were talking, said something about how, the youth, so Sankara's words were like fresh oxygen for the youth. That it gave them hope. It gave them the belief that, that Africa was not cursed, that Africa had, a bright future. And, in a lot of my research, looking over old documents and U.S. Embassy cables, I did a FOIA request, so I have a lot of information to observing where Sankara was going, tracking him around the world, and reading, of course, Jeune Afrique and Africazie and some of these publications to see, the response to Sankara as he traveled around Africa. Everywhere he went, people were out, massive crowds pouring out, as you probably know, cheering, chanting his name. They knew his words, they knew his speeches. They'd been reading his interviews in Jeune Afrique. They'd been listening to cassettes of his speeches and interviews and things like this, of that particular generation, right? But at the same time, so thinking about that, okay, the connection between Che and Thomas Sankara. Do you remember 2 years ago here, you said something about having a kind of a bone to pick with the notion of calling him the African Che. And so I'm going to be a little provocative here now, if you don't mind, and explore that, deepen that analysis a little bit. And while I don't want to cast aspersions on Che, I admire him deeply, I've read a lot about him, read his works, and consider him one of the greatest figures of 20th century history. Nevertheless, I think that in certain ways it can be limiting, It can be sort of to reduce him in a box, to say he's the African Che. Well, they use that phrase for Cabral, they use that phrase for Samra Machel, and in many others too. And last time I was in Ouagadougou, I met with Jean-Pascal Ouedraogo, And we were talking, Jean Pascal, does anyone know Jean Pascal Ouedraogo, who was sort of the older brother of Thomas Sankara growing up in Gawa? Taught him how to play guitar, taught him the ropes, was sort of his protector, if you will. And he was saying to me, you know, Thomas Sankara, you know, when I hear, I'm trying to remember now, he says, you know, and I was there with Valentin Sankara, the younger brother of Thomas, and we were talking about Che's legacy. And this was right around the time where there were lots of rumors in the streets that Blaise was going to mount a coup. And so Jean Pascal went to Sankara and said, hey, are you going to do anything about it? The coup is, you know, Blaise is planning a coup. And quite frankly, Jean Pascal got really upset. He said, you have to think about your self-preservation. You have to think about your family. You have to think about the repercussions of being assassinated, of accepting being a revolutionary martyr. He said, you know, you've got to do something. You have to respond. We'll never know precisely why he did not respond. But in any case, and so we're talking about that. And this was the day that Sankara was going to give that speech, that commemoration speech in honor of Che, right? So he was over there. It was around that time. I think it was just right before the speech. In any case, and he said, you know, when people say to me that Thomas Sankara is the African Che, I don't understand. I don't agree. Thomas Sankara was Thomas Sankara. You know, and I don't want to disparage against Che, but at the moment he was saying, you know, Che led a revolution, a different kind of revolution. He engaged in guerrilla warfare, et cetera, et cetera. He left his homelands, he left his family, and so on. That wasn't my little brother Thomas. My little brother was not an assassin. And so I thought about that for a while. And there's some truth there. So while we find solidarity, we find commonality and overlap between the two, I think it's also wise to think about the ways in which seeing him in an icon in that light sort of limits our understanding of the historical specificity of Thomas Sankara and the times in which he lived. And it serves to sort of decontextualize his words and kind of reduce them to a certain formula or something. Yeah, there are differences. I don't want to go down a huge laundry list of differences, but Sankara didn't engage in guerrilla warfare. He was trained as a commando, an elite commando. He certainly could do the job if called upon. That's not what he did. He was fundamentally nonviolent. He tried to transform society peacefully. You remember the UN speech when he says something along the lines of the goal of the revolution being providing 2 meals a day and water for every Burkinabe citizen, right? It wasn't about spreading guerrilla warfare, exporting the revolution. It was simple, everyday things, right? Of course, as we know, Che brought the revolution internationally. You know, he left his homelands and things like that. And of course, again, I want to say I have great advantage. I keep needing to say that, but only to point out the differences between the two. I think it can be very instructive in thinking about the contributions of Thomas Sankara to history. You know, and when young Africans during the time in the 1980s were drawn to him, they were drawn to him precisely because he was an African leader who was doing things that other African leaders were not doing. Houphouët Boigny and all the rest were not doing these kinds of things. And so one more point I guess I'd like to make would be that there are a lot of other people that fought with Sankara, fought for his ideals, family, friends, who were persecuted, who suffered, who were tortured, who were killed. And we pay homage to them as well. The revolution would not have been successful without all of these ordinary people, all of these other leaders who played their roles. Recently we lost, of course, one of the great figures of Burkinabe political history. Valère Sommet died several months ago. He played a huge role. And I think if Sankara were here today, he would probably say something along the lines of pay homage to them, right? Pay homage to the people. And rightfully so. And I don't know if you remember in one of the interviews, I think it was around 1985, 1986, something like this, and they were asking him about, I think it was Rap, with Rap was asking him about what he'd want his legacy to be, something like this, or if you were afraid of being physically eliminated. He said, well, I would just hope that my life had been useful. I would hope that my life had contributed to, in certain ways, the cause of the people, right? And that he had fought for the people and with the people, and that being fundamentally what he'd hope his memory would be. And so, with that, I'll just want to say thank you so much for giving me the chance to say a few words. And so,
thank you very much. Thank you very much, Brian Peterson. Thank you. Thanks a lot. The next speaker is going to be Faye Jume. Faye Jume is from Senegal. I speak like people here originally from Senegal, based in New York, and he's a leader of a Pan-African movement that is being built now, and soon you will hear about the movement. Faye himself is here. He's going to talk about Thomas Sankara's vision and legacy and in relation with the African Renaissance. Fai, please, come forward.
First of all, thank you very much, everyone, for being here. Your presence here tells me that Thomas didn't die for just nothing. People still believe in him and want to hear, are even more excited. As excited as I was in 1986, 85 first, when I left Senegal, young, veterinarian doctor. I didn't want to have anything to do with that. I just wanted to go be with Thomas. I went in Burkina Faso, met him, and came back to Senegal, and came back and spent there about a year, from March 1986 to May 2nd, actually, exactly. I remember permanently when I left, May 2nd, 1987. A period during which I had several times, been involved in many different of the projects. My hands are, for a long time actually remained like callous, because at one point we were digging rocks to build road, because Thomas told us, look, if we want to have to do it, if it needs to be done, and we believe we can do it, we can do it. And so my name is Jomai, and I am, as Nyaka said, the deputy coordinator of the International Provisional Initiating Committee, which is running the Pan-African Federalist Movement. This movement is being built around a call that we call the call for the first Pan-African Federalist Congress. There are calls that have been distributed, and if you look at the bottom and you want to be involved, there is a thing there that you could fill out and hand it back to us. As the coordinator of North America, Amsata, Malmo Amsata likes to say to us, this movement is a very narrow focus, because our own focus is on uniting the African state, nothing else. We all only campaign for the unification of the African states. But as he said, the impact is, though the target is narrow, the impact is going to be certainly very wide. I need to say that I am, must admit that I'm ambivalent in my feeling. I am sad, but I'm excited at the same time. I am excited because there is no better way of remembering Thomas Sankara than being part of a gathering like this, where people are calling about action, 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 and action, and not only talks. Organizing for action, not only for talk. And if you look at the topic, forging intercontinental projects, connections, and concrete, I would include to remind me of Thomas, working relations between African people for the purpose of fully repairing their dignity badly damaged by slavery, colonialism, and restoring their full dignity. Thomas was all about concrete and dignity and sovereignty. That's all what he was about. In the other hand, I said it's very difficult for me to think about Thomas in the past tense, because for many years actually I told Paul this. I refused to talk publicly about Thomas, because I kind of like I felt like no, he's not that. They're just joking. He is somewhere else. For a while, I convinced myself that he is in Gabon because he was good friend with the President Bongo's younger brother. As time goes along, I come to realize that, okay, wake up. This is not like a trick that they're playing on you. Because if you knew Thomas, you cannot imagine that this person could be just that. This is impossible. He was so full of life, so full of love and respect for people, like human life, even though he was a soldier, and it's difficult to imagine that, so it's this, talking about his legacy, maybe this will help me, close the chapter in my old delusional belief that he is still alive. Now, My friend here touched a subject that is very interesting. You know, it is common knowledge that everyone knows that that man, I don't name his name, I don't use his name, was preparing something against Thomas. Thomas knew it. He was intelligent. He knew it very well. But what a lot of people didn't understand, but Thomas, see, he believed in the sanctity of friendship. You are a friend, I can't touch you. If I touch you, then I'm not friend. And if Thomas says something, he believes in it. He is not like a fake person. Until he died, he believed that that man was his friend. And this is why he didn't do anything. And you know what? We lost him. We are very sad, you know. But there is one thing that he taught us. Dignity. Dignity. Betrayal. You cannot betray. You cannot betray. And that's a lesson for us. And I would say that... just the paper. No, the paper. I wanted to say thank you, Paul, for giving me these names. I didn't know who is here. I'm sorry, Pascal. You know, Pauline, Colette, Maimuna, you lost an uncle. We all lost someone who was dear to us. But there is one thing that Thomas has done. The name Sankara is today associated with dignity. When you say that I am a Sankara, everyone believes you first before you can prove them wrong. So that Thomas brought that to the name Sankara. And even people who are not biologically linked to Sankara, and I know some of them, are using today the name Sankara to get political fame. So he did something that, you know, that to me is how I explain why he didn't do anything about Blaise. Because it was really, you know, he could not really, he could not betray. He could not betray, and that was not in his fabric. The lessons that Thomas Sankara taught us, which means what we call his legacy. You see, Thomas didn't spend a lot of time writing, you know, books or directing people on what to do. No, he really didn't spend time doing that. Yeah, he had his speeches, and many of them actually he did them without writing anything. Just, you know, he said what he felt, and, you know, sometimes, you know, like no one is not perfect. Sometimes he said some, oh, Thomas, you come down a little bit, you know, here, there. Yeah, he spoke his mind, you know, and many of his speeches are just like things that come in his mind when he spoke. So many of the lessons that we can read, that we can learn from him are really what he did concretely, his actions. His actions are really where we could tell what exactly the legacy of Thomas is, what he believed in, what he was thinking, and all that stuff. All that Thomas did through his action, he was very concerned with making sure that the Africa and the Burkina Faso of Walter at that time that he believed in was not a utopia. He was changing things to tell people, look, we could do it if we really think of it, if we want it, if we put it in our heart and mind, then we could do it. He did not believe in anything that had to do with impossibility. If you say now it's not possible, for him, you're being lazy, you know. And in fact, one of his favorite slogans was, you know, le paresseux en bas, you know, and whoever has been in Ouaga at that time, probably, or even in the video, you know, two things that was his favorite, les voleurs et les paresseux. He repeated that many, 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 many times because to him, it's voleur, exactly, voleur et paresseux. You know, voleur means, when Thomas said voleur, it's not really the thief. He meant all those politicians who embezzled money, took away the money that belonged to the people. That's really what he meant. That's why I kind of like, you know, that's what he really meant. Les voleurs en bas, that means that the corrupt, the funds embezzlers, you know, all of them. One word he used is laborer, and we liked it. A lot of people, young people, liked it too, because you know these are simple slogans that you don't have to have an academic degree to explain. One of the people actually who captured the most actually is Odile Sankara. I'm going to re-give a quote here. She said that the more time passes, the more his legacy is enhanced and his vision becomes clear to the common people. It is through his ability, and this is important, it is through his ability to be coherent between what he says and what he does, to be the very example of his political and societal project, that he has succeeded in mobilizing the people. That's it there. Thomas, when he said something, we know he believed it, you know, and you have no room to say anything but, you know, believe him, because he does exactly what he believed. He said. Thomas fully understood that his mission was to sow the seeds of resistance to laziness, fatalism, acceptance of domination, oppression, and exploitation in the hearts and minds of the Burkinabe in particular, the African peoples and the oppressed masses around the globe at large. He had no doubt that once these seeds firmly take root, the people will resist and ultimately foil any plan aimed at keeping them as stepping tools for the accumulation of wealth. The witch hunt actually that followed the elimination of Tama demonstrated that actually he still hunted the created of the enemies of the people he loved so much. The ultimate demise of this man 27 years later, his assassin by the Sankarists, was an undeniable proof that Thomas' reading of what the common Burkinabe learned from his teaching during the time he served in various capacities within the government of Apo Volta and then Burkina Faso was right on spot. I said various capacities because Thomas didn't only start teaching when he was president. When he, in the council of ministers, like the ministers are meeting every day, he goes there on a bicycle. The other ministers are going on Mercedes. You know, that kind of like tells people, oh my God, who is this? You know, who is this? When he resigned as a minister, you know, because with all the privileges you have as a minister, he resigned and said, no, you cannot, you know, you cannot keep the people from expressing their will. You know, that was before he even became a president. So this is why when he was asked by journalists, and this is important, when he was asked by journalists, what does he think that the people learned from the revolution? He said himself that the most important, I think, is to have brought the people to a point where they believe in themselves and understand that they alone can write their own happiness and welfare. They can say what they desire and at the same time understand the price to pay for that happiness. And that's it. That's key. If you want something, work for it. Don't be complaining that I don't have the means. I can't do it. Don't work for it. And I just wanted, I don't know, I wanted to just make a little parenthesis about the revolution, the Burkinabe revolution. Some people say it was a coup d'etat. Some people are still lingering in that. But if you understand what was happening in Burkina, Ouagadougou particularly, when the wife of Jean-Baptiste Ouedraogo told him, the people don't want you, why don't you hand them back power? You know, Thomas was in jail, you know, and that the murderer was still in Pau, you know. So the people took the power. If you know the history of the Russian Revolution in 1917, the people are the ones who took the power. The army came to, you know, restore order. That's what the army did in Burkina Faso in August of 1980. But the people had already taken power before they come. And when they took power, they asked for one man to be the leader, and it was Thomas. And I will actually conjecture right here a little bit, because, you know, the assassin, I hope that you understand who I'm talking about, because I don't really use his name. The assassin knew, he was jealous. I could tell that. He was jealous. And what I want to challenge you to do, really look at all the videos that you have seen with Thomas and that assassin. All the videos. The body language and his eyes, how he looked when Thomas, like when they do, you could tell that he is uncomfortable, that there is something there that is wrong. I'm not talking about in 87, where it was evident there was a rift between them, but I'm talking about actually in 83 itself, 84. You look at the, and if you were in their presence, you could tell that this man, there is some sort of jealousy that he has towards Thomas. He wished that when he came from Po that the people will give him, but people said, no, we want Thomas, sorry, So that may have been one of the reasons, and some people gave him the means to do so. And, it's unfortunate for him because his name is certainly dirty in history now. But it's okay. So, I think that most of you are very familiar with the actions that Thomas took to really demonstrate and to teach people. And if you want to look at what the legacy of Thomas Sankara is, go look into the various actions that the government took. The fact that the expenses of the state were reduced, the ministers had absent, and they travel in economy. The fact of tolerance, zero tolerance for corruption, the fact of making people that they ought to feel that they are the masters of their destiny, all of that, and this is, something here. He was not as eloquent probably as, as John Kennedy to say, ask what you can do for your country and not what your country can do for you. He, through his actions, showed to people that that's what they should do. He acted instead of speaking it, So his action really, and I read a quotation here, and this is why Thomas, for me, is sort of kind of the type of leader that Nkrumah was talking about when he said Africa needs a new type of citizens, leaders, a dedicated, modest, honest, informed man and woman who submerge self in service of the nation and mankind, a man and woman who abhor grand and detest vanity, a new type of man and woman whose humility is his or her strength, and whose integrity is his or her greatness. Anyone who knew Thomas, even if you are his enemy, you know that he filled that bill, that Nkrumah, whom he admired a lot, kind of like said was the bill that the new leaders of Africa need to feed. Now, I'm going to rapidly list a few actions here. Like the public health, you see, there were cas de santé when Nkrumah came to presidency. Cas de santés were built all over the place, and they were not like, we didn't have enough time, nurses to go to the villages every single day to be there full time, but at least they went there on kind of like a part-time, once a week or twice to address these needs. And with the help of the militaries, vaccination was almost entirely done for everyone else. There was also something that was fascinating, and we all laughed about it. It was like I think it was Pascal, correct me if I'm wrong, it was le jeudi des femmes, I think it's something like that. I remember perfectly going to the marché of Ouagadougou, seeing men complaining that they don't have enough money for the dépense of the family. Men realized that with that simple action, Thomas showed to men, look, these women, you better be singing for them because they are juggling a lot of things, and the money that you're giving them to go to the market and feed the family is not enough, but they are juggling with that money. And with that particular action, Thomas showed to men, he didn't go into academic discoursing, he just did enough. And people saw exactly, oh wow, gee, les hommes, the men learned a lot in one day of going to the market, instead of reading like books and books of books. Okay, I'm going to wrap up.
So we have 2 minutes now.
2 minutes. Well, the creation of public theaters was also something very, something very, very important in terms of, because they were like, we built public theaters in neighborhood. I was involved in the one in Gunga, personally, and Thomas said to people that, look, we have to have cultural centers, and we could build them ourselves, and those were there. So I'm going to conclude. I'm being forced here, but yeah, I'm being nicely forced. But I will just conclude, if you allow me, by saying that a legacy is not always a lessons. This is very important. Thomas Sankara's legacy is not always, it cannot be comprehended only as lessons. For a man of action like him, Sankara is, Sankara's, what the legacy of Sankara is to finish what he started. You see, he left us a task to finish. And that is a legacy that the young people, today the Sankaris and all over, we need. That is a legacy. It is not something that we could come and say, okay, we learn. He tell us, look, I started this. I lost my life for this. I put you on the right track for you to finish it now. And I think that that is one of the legacy of Thomas that actually kept me going myself. And many of the people who knew him, many of all us Africans who came to Burkina Faso at that time to try to do the revolution with him, we went back home as Pan-Africanists, like really Pan-Africanists, and many of us kept being Pan-Africanists until today and are working for the unity and the sovereignty, the dignity of African people.
Vous l'avez découvert ici. Que vous avez découvert Ivoire TV. Ivoire TV.